Gil Rud went from a farm in rural North Dakota to the cockpits of carrier-based A4s and A7s in the skies from Vietnam to the Mediterranean. His success as a naval aviator led to what many might consider the ultimate reward: command of the U.S. Navy's Flight Demonstration Squadron, better known as the Blue Angels. I met Gil in 1987 at NAS Pensacola when I was stationed down there as a flight instructor operating from the hangar next to the Blue Angels hangar. And I wanted to use this episode to talk to him about the Blues transitioning from the A4 to the Hornet and his overall responsibilities as Blue Angel number 1. We start the conversation when he first considered applying for the job.
I had not paid any attention to the Blue Angels, none, up to this point. Just, I was too damn ugly. There was no way I was going to be a Blue Angel, So I got a call from Jim Maslowski, who was ex-Blue Angel and a friend of mine, a light attack pilot like me. And he said, "I think you ought to apply for this." And I go, "Oh, come on, Jim, that's not going to work for me." And then I got a second call from Randy Clark, Pogo Clark, who had been the strike ops guy on Ranger. And so, worked with him pretty much every day and stuff. So he got a chance to, I guess, watch me fly. And by the way, I finally figured out how to land on a carrier. So I did win the individual tail hook during that time, which was helpful, of course. And so he convinced me to give it a shot. So I applied. 12 of us applied. And 6 of us were selected to be finalists. And so we were then to go to Corpus Christi, Texas, to interview with 5 captains and a retired Blue Angel. And the 5 captains were the commodores of the various training commands units down there. And so I show up down there, and at that time I had this nice big red mustache. Okay, and so did everybody else, but they shaved them all off because the Blues are, clean shaven. And I go, I got no chance of getting this, so I'm not shaving my mustache. So down we go, and we go into this interview process, and it's pretty brutal. I mean, this is it's a situational kind of an interview, and stuff. They put you in some situations, and it was really well done, I thought. But the one leg up I had, I think, is the fact that I had actually been a recruiter for 2.5 years. And so I used that. I said, "What's different among you compared to these other guys?" And I said, "Well, I was a recruiter, and I know how to work with the recruiting command. And that'll be a priority for me,
Hey, if you watch my channel regularly, I'm going to assume you like airplanes. And I'm sure part of that appeal is the pure beauty of them. In fact, it's not a stretch to say they can be considered works of art. One of the greatest artists of the last century, a guy named Gerhard Richter, painted an entire series of jets, and one of them sold for $15.5 million in 2019. That's a lot of money, even if you're a fan of jets. So why would somebody pay that much? 2 main reasons. The painting is stunning with its lines and how it captures the sense of raw speed, and it's a great investment. So at this point, I can hear you saying, "Mooch, I don't have $15.5 million laying around to spend on some painting." I got it. But now you can enjoy the same potential rates of return as the rich investors with Masterworks. Masterworks is a platform that lets you turn art by legends like Warhol, Picasso, and Basquiat into an actual investment for a fraction of the full price. And the last time inflation soared this high, in the 70s, fine art still appreciated an average of 17.5% per year. Masterworks has still delivered results this year, selling 5 paintings, the last 3 of which returned 17, 21, and 33% net to their investors. Masterworks has done so well that there's a waitlist to sign up. But you can skip that waitlist with my exclusive channel link in the episode description. The platform is intuitive and easy to use, so check it out. Took a while for the powers that be to make their choice for who is going to be the next Blue Angels commanding officer, and a month after Gil returned to Washington, D.C., where he worked at the Bureau of Naval Personnel, he got the call one evening at home.
So I picked up the phone and I go, "Good evening, Admiral. I assume you're going to tell me I did okay, but you picked somebody else for the job." And he goes, "Nope, I've already made those calls." And I almost fainted. I mean, seriously. I mean, I went, "What? You're the guy," he said. "But shave that mustache off tonight." And I showed up a couple weeks before the end of season, and in those days there was very little turnover. There was no chance to really fly in the show like nowadays with the Super Hornet or the Hornet. The new boss can get in the back with the old boss and fly through practices and air shows and whatnot. In this case, Haas Pearson was my predecessor, and we got in the TA4J, which it had that little P6 engine. It couldn't keep up. There was very much an emergency use in the formation. And so we got in that thing, and just he and I, and he flew through all the maneuvers. And I went, oh, he's making 200-foot bottoms off of loops and stuff. And I'm going, maybe I bit off more than I could chew here. Because that was kind of a weird year in the fact that they had a bad accident. Niagara Falls where Dinkershan, with number 6 was killed in that midair. And Andy Caputi, great pilot, and he was number 5, but for lots of good reasons, he couldn't come back. The normal thing, but he would come back again to be 5, and then we'd move a 6 in. Well, in this case, he couldn't come back, and so we ended up having to take number 4, not having to. He volunteered, Kurt Watson volunteered to go from number 4 to number 5. And I don't know that's ever been done. In 40 years, we had killed 20 pilots. That is not good odds.
As the 1986 team began their rigorous training process at El Centro, Gil had to figure out how to balance his status as a new Blue Angel pilot against the fact that he was in charge of everything.
Even though you're a newbie, as they call it, and, so you don't have any experience, but you are the boss, okay? And you are also the commanding officer. And so right from day one, you are expected to lead the brief. And so that requires, over some period of time, memorizing 3 air shows. I never worked so hard in my life. I mean, I would guess in El Centro, I would say we flew twice a day, an hour and a half each flight. And that's usually about 2 air shows. But a lot of times it was just one maneuver after the other, and then just one maneuver over and over again, depending what you're doing. And so in the evenings, I would probably study 2 to 3 hours to memorize all that stuff and be ready for the next day. And there was no partying, nothing. There was just work. And you'd get, you had field systems in all the airplanes, and it varied with how much pressure you needed, but basically you need around 30 pounds of pull just to get to neutral, with the stick. And so everybody would get wrist soreness. And also, I can't get the thing to do it, but the wingmen, would put their elbow on their top of their leg and then hold the stick from there. And so we don't wear G-suits. Okay, and people say, well, why is that some kind of macho testosterone-related thing that you don't wear a G-suit? No, it's because you want to feel those G's. Imagine this, in an A4 Skyhawk, to do a line abreast loop. We had a big giant G-meter, up in the airplane, much bigger than a normal one. And I would fly that maneuver. You'd have to enter it. I think the enter airspeed was no less than 450 knots. And then, because imagine now, you got to give the wingman something to play with. And so 92% was the full throttle in a J52 P408. And so I would run 87% on the power to get this and to get high enough to come down and get that. And then I would fly 2.75 Gs on that up and coming over the top. Okay. And so that was, it's very precise. When you do a line abreast, it's the only time where they're not so close to you that you can have drift or whatever and they can see it, right? They can't see it. They're 10 feet apart here. And so if you make a correction, they won't see the rate coming at them. Okay. And so whatever you have with that stick, you hold. And so going over the top in the A4, I would, the gyro just tumbles with stuff. So you look back over your head like this, you look for the horizon on the side. And for whatever reason, I would always have a little bit of right wing down when I went over the top of that loop. And number 2, Mark Bircher would say, whatever you do to boss, don't try to fix it. Because that's when things get ugly. Just stay with it.
Now, as the Blue Angels performed at air shows across the country during Gil's first season as boss in the spring and summer of 1986, he and several other pilots were involved in deciding what follow-on jet the Blues would use to replace the aging A4 that they'd used since the early 70s. They considered the F-14, but ruled against it because it was too large and heavy and hard to maintain in the context of Blue Angels operations. They considered the A-7, but crossed that off because it was also an aging airframe and the fleet needed every airplane they had. They also considered the T-45 Goshawk, which at the time had just been fielded as the U.S. Navy's new training aircraft. Gil explains why that wasn't the best option.
If we do that, we're going to have to fly 9 or 10 of them, because that's what all the, the Red Arrows and the other countries that fly these trainer type airplanes, the snowbirds and their Tudors and whatnot, is that really what we want to do? And especially since the Air Force just went to F-16s, we got to have a tactical jet out there. And so, okay, now Secretary Lehman, who thank goodness was still active duty, he was an ally, but he said, okay, how do we handle this politically? And well, what we decided was if we get the F-18s, we'd get only the LRIP, the low rate initial production airplanes, which you're familiar with from your Pax River days.
Yep.
You know, and those are not carrier suitable. And now they're kind of out there where, okay, the RAG was using them, but you know, they're really not needed in the fleet. And then we threw in this absolute bullshit story about if we get these then, and if the balloon goes up, you know, we'll just take all these airplanes to VFA 106 and we, Blue Angels, will then become instructors over in VFA 106. Yeah, right. You know, so anyway, this was all thrown together as this package to sell to the decision makers, and they gave us a thumbs up. Okay, we got the F-18 approved. Now we need to modify it. How do we need to modify it? Took out the gun and put a smoke tank of equal weight up in the nose, and then had to run the lines back to the exhaust. That was kind of a big deal. We took the ACLS package out of the airplane. Obviously, we're not going to fly ACLS. We put the ILS system, the civilian approach system that the Canadians had. We took that and put it into our airplanes. Okay, and so now we had a way of getting in and out of civilian airfields other than to lie about having a VOR like we did in A4s. we would always say, oh, my VOR isn't working very well. Can I get a radar vector?
Yeah, it doesn't work very well when you don't have one.
Yep.
Yeah. In parallel to you guys flying the 86 season in A4s, they're figuring out how the airplane's going to perform, how the Hornet's going to perform.
Developmental test pilots. These are different than operational test pilots. These are guys who've all been through the test pilot school, and they're working in Pax River. And so they're used to expanding the envelopes on all sorts of new airplanes. In this case, just expanding the envelope on an existing airplane. And so Commander Keith Crawford, now these are not Blue Angels, these are test pilots. And Commander Keith Crawford was in charge of this team to expand the envelope on the F-18 so it would meet our needs. And that included the spring on the stick to give us a field system. And so then now they're out there flying with that spring on the stick to see how it's going to work. And then also we needed to expand or check on whether or not we could do the A4 maneuvers. That was pretty much, if we could do all those A4 maneuvers, we'll have a heck of an air show. You know, and so let's try all those and see if we can do them. Well, in the process of doing that, we were trying to do horizontal rolls. Now we knew we couldn't do 4 because 4 horizontal rolls need 700 degree a second roll rate in the A4. Now we have a 260 degree a second roll rate. So let's see if we can do 3. Now that the test pilot is out there, and instead of doing this at 100 feet like we do in the A4, he's at 5,000, thank goodness. You know, so he goes along, and now the engineers and he's all hooked up. He's narrating this whole thing, and they've got him, of course, on film and on telemetry and everything. And so he's out there, and he starts, and he goes, "Okay, Yug, cancel, roll." And he goes over, and he goes, "There's 1, there's 2," and then as he starts the third one, you hear the beep, 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 as the yaw starts building up, and then it goes, bam, it departs. And I mean nasty, end over end departure. And when it departs, the test pilot goes, "Holy shit." And then he goes, "Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit," like this as it's going down, and he gets it recovered and pulls out at 500 feet. And in the background, you can hear the engineers saying, "Eject, eject, eject." So we were that close to losing probably the program.
By the time you get to, okay, final show in November, now, you know, holidays around Pensacola, then we get ready to go to El Centro for winter training. Now, is everybody trained up now? How did people go through the RAG, and how did that work?
We said we want to be able to know what air to ground works like, how air to air works like, aerial refueling, and we need to do all this stuff, and we need to do it in 3 weeks. So we went over and flew some simulators, and then a couple of FAM hops. And then we went to Key West and did air-to-air and some air-to-ground stuff. So
the other thing you mentioned, Hollywood Anderson, and these are just some of the variables, right? So he was an A6 guy.
Yeah.
Right. So he'd never, maybe I'm guessing here, but he'd never flown an afterburner airplane.
No, none of us had, except for Leroy.
Well, but you had some Tomcat time. You had some Tomcat.
Yeah, he's a Tomcat guy.
But you had some Tomcat time. You did.
Yeah, 2 flights.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's close enough for saying that you tapped burner before. But anyway, this is a whole new thing, right? A whole new dimension to the Blue Angels for the existing team.
The beauty of it was, like the F4, our afterburners, unlike the Tomcat or the F-16 at that time anyway, were fully modulated, not staged, because you cannot fly formation in a staged afterburner. You know, trying to match stage 3 in a Tomcat with another guy, that gets a little tough, right? But ours were fully modulated, just like a regular throttle. Still, when we finally got back to Pensacola, we started flying up and down the north coast of the Gulf of Mexico there for hours on end, doing nothing but burner drills. So going, burners ready now, and I put the burners on, and then they try to match it, you know, and then coming out of burners ready now, okay, and we would work on that forever, trying to get that coordinated. Finally, we decided that I was coming out of what I thought was about 70% burner, but it was, you know, just pulling to that spot, not very accurate. And so then we decided to put a burner stop in the airplane. And so that meant that full burner for me was only 70% of burner. That way I couldn't leave people behind. All right. I mean, they could have 30% of that burner to play with.
Did you already have a sense of how you're going to modify the show, or did you guys do some exploration when you're at El Centro? Because, you know, clock's ticking, right? You can't do a whole lot of audibles once you're, you know, in El Centro, right?
So that first year, we worked on seeing how much of the A4 show we could fly, because it's a pretty damn good show, you know. So let's fly that, and then we'll add some F-18 maneuvers. So somebody brought in a tape or whatever they had. I want to say it was Polish MiG-29s, and they did a loop on takeoff. Now, they were same way, same day. They were all over the sky, you know, nothing like what the Blue Angels would be. But we thought, I wonder if we can do that. So, well, let's give it a shot. So Mark Bircher, number 2, and we took off, and, you know, burner, and I got, you know, 70% burner, and got what we thought was enough speed. You know, I can't remember what it was now, 300 knots or something. And then up we go. We did this loop on takeoff now, gear up. But I tell you, so we go up over the top. I'm still in burner, all the way over the top. And geez, on the backside, we are screaming, you know. Nope, that didn't work. So we keep coming out of burner earlier and earlier and earlier until we're doing it 90 degrees nose up. You know, so you watching the show and you'll see the smoke come on about 90 degrees nose up. And from then on, it's a battle to slow down. You know, you're pulling power and you're floating over the top, kind of coming on the backside. And we were able to do just about all the A4 stuff, certainly in Diamond. And then we brought in the Diamond dirty loop and the loop on takeoff. And then we brought in one called the Diamond Burner 360. And what you can do is you can bring this in level at real slow, like 220 knots in formation, and then you light the burners and you put the burners right on the crowd, right at the center line. And I mean, now you got, you know, all these burners and that noise, it shakes the ground and whatnot at 500 feet. And then you make a turn, and as you get to 4 Gs for me, or 400 knots, whichever comes first in that thing, you come out of burner. And that's a tough one to match, because now they're at 4 Gs in formation. And then you keep it, you finish at 1500. Start at 5, finish at 15. Well, when the Italians had that terrible accident in Germany, do you remember that? Where they had the Solo came through and hit, and they went all into the crowd. Well, now the FAA came after all of us, and they said, you know, you got it. We're looking at all your maneuvers, and boss, we think this one pointing at the crowd, there's a lot of movement in the formation. And there was, coming out of burner. And he said, so they took that one away. We weren't able to do that one after, well, actually 88 on the next one. But now they've got a 270 maneuver, which finishes without pointing at the crowd, which is really awesome. And so over the years, they've figured out stuff. In ours, we struggled with trying to get something for landing because, in the A4, we landed all 6 of them on the runway at the same time, if there was a 200-foot wide runway. I hated that maneuver, fraught with risk. The back row touches down first, then 2 and 3 touch down, and then the flight leader. And all of this is done not at the typical speeds of an A4, but rather, slats bolted up, which means we're 150 knots on speed. And I had to be directly on the center line, because if I was off at all, one of the 2 solos might easily hit a mile or a foot marker or whatever it's alongside the runway there. And so there was just a lot of stress in that thing. And in the A4, we had chutes. And so we'd use those. We'd go to small air shows. We could go as low as a 5,000-foot runway and just land individually and use the chute to stop. But it was also there in case somebody needed it in the multi-plane landing. But think about this. Now, if I had to use the chute, so I would have to say, boss needs a chute. Back row chutes, 2 and 3 chutes. Then I could pull my chute. By this time, I'm more likely to be off in a desert place.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, there's some hairy stories from the old days of.
Well, Admiral Lash used to tell a story. I guess either 4, 5, or 6 forgot to raise his hook, right? And so he saw in his rear view mirror somebody just stopped very quickly as they landed. He caught the wire as they touched down first. So that wasn't a heartbreaker to you that you couldn't do that move in the Hornet.
But one of the things that was a huge advantage in the F-18 over the A4 was simply getting to show sites. The A4 had nothing, absolutely nothing. No computer. It had a TACAN. Oh, guess what? The TACANs are only at military bases. But, with the F-18, of course, it was extremely efficient at high altitude. And so think about it, we're flying it slick. And what we do is we're trying to get out of Pensacola, and there's all of these restricted areas and stuff. So they step us up. We waste a lot of gas. So Pat Walsh went over and worked with the controllers over there and got us something called a zoom departure. A zoom departure is predicated on 25,000 foot a minute rate of climb. Okay, so now what we do is we take off with a diamond on one of the parallel runways at Pensacola, and then the 2 solos on the other. And as we take off, we'll use burner, then I'll come out of burner, and these guys said, "You got 6, boss." I'll light the burners, take her to 70%, pull the nose up 30 plus degrees, look at my airspeed indicator and hold 250 knots. Okay, that'll give us 25,000 foot a minute rate of climb, and we stay within 5 miles of the field and just circle up overhead till we get to flight level 290, and then we're off.
Following his 3 years as the commanding officer of the Blue Angels, Gil went on to command the USS Constellation. But when he looks back on his entire flying career, Gil considers his time as Blue Angel number 1 as the most unique among some very rewarding tours.
There's so many people, so many naval aviators that could do it. Okay, they can only have room for one guy to be selected at a time to do it, and that happened to be me. And I had an absolute blast doing it. It's 300 days a year on the road. It can be a little tough at times, but what you got to remember is you get to put on that blue suit every day. I just look back on I'm just so thankful that I had an opportunity to do it.
So that'll do it for this episode. Thanks to my longtime good friend, Captain Gil Rud, for taking us in depth on what it's like to be Blue Angel number 1. For more on that, as well as the entire story of his amazing life from the farms of North Dakota to command of the Blue Angels and an aircraft carrier, check out his book, From the Prairie to the Pacific, A Blue Angel's Journey. And if you're not already a subscriber, click the button and ring the bell so you don't miss anything. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/wardcarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.